everyone, and welcome to another episode of Hope in the Time of Corona, or today is Pentecost in the Time of Corona. My name's Esther and I am married to Matt, who I'm sure you've seen in many videos. He's a curate at Hope Church, and this is the first time that I've been solo in front of the camera, which is a little bit daunting, but I'm very excited to be here. We are going to be taking a little break from our usual Sunday service, which is the series of Judges that we've been doing, and we are going to be talking about Pentecost today, and it's going to look a little bit different to usual. It's going to be a shorter talk, and then later on at our post-sermon 11 a.m. Zoom discussion, rather than discussing what I've spoken about, we're going to be putting into practice what I've spoken about. And as it's Pentecost, you might be able to guess that means we're going to be waiting on the Holy Spirit. And for some people that may sound a little bit daunting, but you don't need to be scared. It's going to be safe and it's going to be welcoming, and I think it's going to be a really nice time to experience what the Holy Spirit is. What does this mean? So I'm really excited for that, and hopefully I will see you there. So Pentecost, for the purpose of this talk, we're going to be going back 50 days before Pentecost, which is Passover. And you may remember the Maundy Thursday meal that we had about 50 days ago, where we reenacted over Zoom the Passover meal. So that was about 50 days ago, or if you're trying to get a gauge of time, lockdown started about 60 days ago. And so that's how far back we're going. And we're going to be talking about the disciples a little bit, because for the disciples, who were Jesus's closest friends, and they'd given up their lives, they'd given up everything they knew to follow Jesus. And these 50 days have been crazy for them. So they had Passover, and then Jesus was arrested, and he was then crucified, and he was betrayed by one of their closest friends, Judas, who was also a disciple. And then he died, and I'm sure they were in mourning, but suddenly there were these rumors that Jesus actually might have come back to life. And then one day the disciples are in a room eating their dinner, probably grieving together, and a being walks through the wall. And they're like, to be fair, they probably should have seen that coming, right, after the years that they've had of following Jesus. And they thought, a ghost? But Jesus comes up to them and he says, no, I'm not a ghost. Feel my hands, feel my feet. It's me, it's Jesus. Have you got any food? And then after that, they are given the commissioning by Jesus, which is where Jesus says to them, now go and preach to all the nations. And then there's the ascension, which was last week, which is when Jesus goes back to heaven. And now, after all of that, the disciples are kind of left in this crazy place. Like, after these 50 days, they're left there, and they're afraid because they just saw the Romans, the system, the power, kill an innocent man, their friend Jesus, and they know that it's not safe to be associated with him, and definitely not safe to go around saying, Jesus, he's the Lord, turn to Christ. And so instead of doing any of the things that they were commissioned to do, like going out and preaching or doing miracles like they had been doing before, they're hiding in an upper room with the doors locked. And I'm sure that for the disciples, there were points where they thought, man, do you remember when we lived in Galilee next to the lake? Do you remember when we'd head out on our boats and go fishing, and we had our family nearby and it was safe, and we were doing what our fathers did? Like, we knew what we were doing. It wasn't scary. And I'm sure that there were times when they thought, maybe we should just go back. Maybe that is what's better. Like, we're not doing any of the things Jesus told us to do anyway. Like, maybe we should just go back. But Jesus told them something very interesting before he left. So at the commissioning, he said to the disciples, wait in the city until the Holy Spirit comes. Wait where you are, stay where you are in Jerusalem until the Holy Spirit comes. And I'm sure that was like a weird thing for them. They didn't know the Holy Spirit. We know the Holy Spirit, but they didn't know the Holy Spirit. And they were put in this position where they had to decide, do we leave? Do we go back to what we know? Do we go back to our habits, to kind of our default ways of dealing with things? Or do we step into something new and follow what Jesus said and wait here for the Spirit? And I think for me, I like just a small example, but like that little tension of like, do I do what I've always done, what feels safe and easy, or do I do something new, is summed up to me nearly every single day when I'm at home with the kids and I'm feeling tired and I'm feeling like, just a bit exhausted. And my default is always, I'll just go on social media. I'll just scroll through Facebook, I'll just scroll through Instagram, and I'll remove myself from the situation for a bit, and for a few moments, I'll feel the endorphins or whatever it is that are released from looking on social media. And I know in that moment, without waiting on the Spirit in like a Pentecost kind of fire and howling winds, I know because the Spirit lives inside of me that actually that's not the way I should live my life. Those aren't the decisions I should make. I should just spend a moment in those moments and think, okay, what should I do? And I know that like the answer is don't go on social media. Reject that. Spend time with the kids or whatever it may be, but don't hide away by going for the habits that I've always done before. But sometimes it's not as simple and it's not as easy as that. And I'm sure for the disciples that was the case. They've got their lives on the line. They're stepping out into something brand new. And I'm sure it was scary. Like they don't have Jesus, the guy that they were following, with them anymore. And maybe there are times where you felt unsure or you felt fearful in a big way, not in like the little things, but in the big things. Maybe that's in should I marry this person, or should I move house, or should I get a new job? For me, definitely when we moved to Islington, after a few years we had the opportunity to decide whether we wanted to live in community or not. And Matt and I both had felt a call on our lives for a while, like, yeah, we're made to live in community. But when the opportunity was presented to us, the idea of people knowing me because they see me all the time, knowing my flaws, knowing my good stuff, my bad stuff, being there in the like weeks after you have a child where your hormones are everywhere, like that felt terrifying to me. That felt really vulnerable for me. And it took Matt and I both sitting there and waiting for the Spirit and praying this through to realize actually like God has called us to bigger things, like a little shift in perspective. And so we said yes to living in community. And maybe you're bored of us all now because I feel like all of the Hope in the Time of Corona videos come from this very house. But yeah, I think that Jesus particularly tells us wait for the Spirit in the times where we are tempted to react out of fear or confusion or anxiety, when the times when we're tempted to think, oh, I'll do what I did before, I'll do what feels safe. I'll go back to my old ways. For the disciples, it would have been, I'll go back to being a fisherman. Those are the times that he tells us to sit, to stay where we are and to wait for the Spirit. Because in waiting for the Spirit, that's when we get to experience like fullness of life beyond what we could have imagined. And we see in the story of the disciples, an amazing testimony of this, right? So they start the day and they're in this room, locked in there, terrified. They wait on the Spirit. And I'm just going to read you like the first 2 or 4 verses of the story of Pentecost. And you'll see what I mean about how things can change when you invite the Spirit. So this is Acts 2. On the day of Pentecost, all the believers were meeting together in one place. Suddenly, there was a sound from heaven like the roaring of a mighty windstorm, and it filled the house where they were sitting. Then, what looked like flames or tongues of fire appeared and settled on each of them. and everyone present was filled with the Holy Spirit and began speaking in other languages, as the Holy Spirit gave them this ability. And if you know any of the rest of the story of Pentecost, you'll know that they started speaking in these languages. There were healings. Rather than being afraid of even associating themselves with Jesus, they got up on platforms and started preaching that not only was Jesus their friend, but he's the Lord and everyone should turn to him. And in that, I don't know if it was that day or the next day, but 3,000 people turned to Christ, and that was the start of the early church, which is incredible. So they start the day afraid, fearful, unsure, totally lost perspective. They stay in that place instead of reverting to the habits, to the things that they were used to what feels safe. And then they wait for the Spirit, and boom, everything changes. The early church has started. They're given this new lease of life. They're like, yes, this is my calling. This is what Jesus commissioned us to. This is what I want to step into. And I think that this can be our story too. This can be a truth for us, that when instead of going for making the decisions according to what we did before, if we wait for the Spirit and let the Spirit lead us, then we can see 3,000 people come to Christ. But the thing that is really exciting for me is that we get to step into our callings. So, God created us, and he created each of us with callings, with desires. And when we step into the Spirit, when we step into the things that God has for us, and we let him have our lives, that is when we get to live in that place of going out into our calling, feeling fulfilled, seeing more than what we could have imagined God doing in our lives and to the lives of those around us as well. And it doesn't mean that everything will be easy. If you follow the story of the disciples, for some of them it did mean death. It doesn't mean that things are fixed. It doesn't mean that things are easy, but it does mean that regardless of circumstance, we can have hope and we can have joy, and we can know that we are living for something bigger than just ourselves. We can live big lives rather than the small lives that we have to live if we keep doing the things the way that we always did them before. And maybe you can relate to that particularly now, perhaps in the time of Corona. You can relate to living in a little bit of fear and uncertainty of work, or of not being able to see family. That's really hard. But I think that we have an amazing opportunity now to have kind of stopped a little bit. I feel for me especially, I feel like we are kind of in that point that the disciples were in the upper room, where we're I know that things are about to really change, but I don't know what that looks like, or how that's going to happen. And so I think we have this amazing opportunity to stop, to wait for the Spirit to come, and from there to let that change us, to let that change our lives, that we would be in alignment with God, with the callings, that we can live out the fullness of all of those things that he's offered to us. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing at the post-11 Zoom. Or not post-11, the post-sermon 11 o'clock Zoom. We're going to take the time to kind of pause. I like to think of waiting on the Spirit as taking a deep breath, and we're going to be kind of taking that deep breath together. It's not going to be scary. You're not going to be put on the spot, but we are just going to take the time to wait and to listen to the Spirit, and to see what God is calling us into for this new season. So I'm really excited to see you there. Get excited. Bye.